Corn School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Veltima Fungicide and Pride Seeds.
Hi, I'm Bernard Taube and welcome to the Corn School. Today I'm down at Thamesville, Ontario, catching up with Cullen Tinline from Kearney Planters. Cullen, how's it going?
It's going very well, thank you.
Awesome. Now your focus here is on planters, and it's that time of year when maintenance is the key. A lot of growers are considering, what they need to do with that planter. How do they get it ready to roll? What are some of the calls you typically get?
We get most of our phone calls actually are regarding maintenance this time of year, especially. We get a lot of, is this wore out? Should I replace it? What should I be looking for? And I guess, we're going to put together a little video today and kind of go from front to back on this planter and show the people what we're looking for.
Awesome. So, hey, we're going to start the front of the planter, work our way back to the row unit. Let's go.
Okay, so we've got our planter in a nice warm shop here. If you're like myself, you're waiting to get this thing out in a few days, maybe when the weather's a little nicer. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to hook the tractor up to the planter. We talk a lot about hydraulic cleanliness, so we're just going to move down here and grab a hold of this. This one's pretty clean. We've got a brand new planter here, but in the most cases, we want to take a rag and just wipe this thing off. And the next thing we want to check is just down here is our clevis. This is our main hitching point to the tractor, and we want to make sure that this isn't showing any signs of wear, that our hardware is secure, maybe that our safety chain is intact. Next, we're going to kind of move back along the planter here. As we're coming back, once we've got our connections made to the tractor, we want to just keep an eye at all of our hydraulic hoses here and our fittings. It's a good idea just to quickly look at every crimp, make sure we've got no seepage around here. Every fitting, there's O-rings in here, make sure we got no seepage. Also, we want to look at the coating on the hydraulic hoses. This is a brand new planter. Obviously, the coating's very well, but as things age, the coating starts to come off and we expose the braiding, and that's a chance for a leak. We'll take a look around this cylinder here. If this is seeping now, typically, we'd maybe worry that we'd have a bigger problem down the road, and as we're doing this, we really want to look after this stuff now before we hit the field. And as we're going to move back, we're going to continue back to planter here, and we're going to just take a look at every set of wiring and hoses as we go back, especially at the back there. We've got a lot of moving parts, some pivot points. This particular planter goes up and down the post. Any place where those hoses are flexing or the wiring is flexing, that's going to be a place we really want to take some extra care. Another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about wiring and hoses is some of the newer builds we do, the more elaborate builds we do, we get more hydraulics, more electrical. In some cases, we're putting hydraulically driven alternators on these things because we're overpowering the amperage the tractor can provide. The more wiring we get, the more connectors we get, the more diligent we got to be. Also, when we're speaking of alternators, some of those pieces may have a battery. A good thing to keep in mind is we should have those batteries inside in the wintertime. A warm, dry place is the best maintenance for those. Yeah, so the second point I want to talk about, which is maybe forgotten in a lot of places because it's not an integral part per se. On this planter it is. We've got some poly wear guides in between the posts there. That is a critical adjustment. I would suggest talking to your dealer on that. On other planters, rigid planters, we've got rock shafts and wheel modules that have pins, and on some front fold planters we've got wheel modules, but we've also got pivot pins at the draft tube and the mainframe. I guess the major point here to make is we've seen these pins seize up from time to time, and it can cause some pretty expensive damage. So, let's just make sure those are free and keep those lubricated. Another point that I don't feel like maybe gets enough attention sometimes is tires and wheels. Inflation pressure especially, the maximum that's listed on the sidewall of the tire is never, if not very often, the right specification. Not only are they important for stabilization and for the wear life of the tire, but it's super important because the rolling radius of these tires is carefully calculated into the rate charts. This tire on the bottom end here is 40 psi and 50 psi on our little top drive tire here, and that ratio is very critical. If you phone us on a Kinsey planter with a rate type question, my first thing I'm going to ask you is, have you checked your tire pressure? Something else while we're on the subject of tires and wheels is actually the wheel itself here. Quite often we can overlook this wheel bolt torque, which is in your manual for your specifications. We want to check that rim around there to make sure there's no cracking. And also, it's a good idea to jack it up and check the wheel bearings. Make sure they aren't loose, make sure they aren't dry sounding. We got a lot of weight going down the road here on these 4 tires, and safety is a #1 importance. So last but not least, maybe some might say the most important part of the planter is our row unit. We're just going to quickly run through some things here. Number one I want to talk about is parallel arm health. We can see a lot of times with loose bushings, what we get is a row unit chatter, which can affect our seed distribution area, and also maybe the type of plinko effect with the seed falling down. We want to make sure those bolts are tight. That's the number one thing we run into, and I would suggest maybe torquing those to specification at the beginning of every season. We got a 2-piece bushing here in our 05 series Kinsey row unit, so that might help with parallel arm replacement down the road, but for most parts it's going to be bushings and arms. The next thing we want to talk about is our seed blades. A lot of times we'll have people doing them, measuring them this way. We can get a false reading over top of our hub. I would suggest removing the seed blade and measuring it from side to side this way. These blades are 16 inches brand new. At 15.5 we recommend replacement. Now that we've got this off inside here, we can look at some of these components. The number one thing I like to look at is this inner scraper, as some people call it, or as I like to call it, a seed tube guard. On this Kinsey here, 5/8 of an inch is the minimum at the bottom. Its purpose is when these seed blades squeeze together to protect the seed tube and the row unit shank. We can see here, this is a seed tube that has not been protected, and we've got a little bit of a flake in at the bottom. And what that's going to happen is give seed deflection every time we get a seed falling down the row unit. Next, we want to back up. This unit is equipped with Ketons. There is a tension spec on these Ketons, which is 1.25 inches to lift it off the ground. We can set that tension here. So it needs 1.25 pounds to lift off the ground, tension set here. As we're moving up this row unit, the next important thing we want to talk about is these here. On a Kinsey, a 3.5 millimeter or 3.5 millimeter blade, we want to set this tension in here, the seed blade contact, from 1 to 1.5 inches. I'd recommend 1.5 inches on a new blade, an inch maybe as we get closer to the bottom end. Another thing that we like to do here, these blades are brand new, they have a lot of paint on them. Our guys will buff this off or scrape it off with a utility knife. We want to make sure we have metal to metal contact on these so that our adjustment is proper. And the other thing I can mention on this is we want to use a piece of paper when we set these. We're going to slide a piece of paper in from the bottom and a piece of paper in from the top, and we're going to measure our gap from 1 to 1.5 inches there. Business cards, playing cards, I've heard mentioned, tend to be a little bit thick, and we'll throw that measurement off. Another small thing to note if you're doing this yourself at home, the left-hand side of these seed blades on almost every planter is left-hand thread. Make sure we turn that in the opposite way, or we can break the bolt, or in some cases end up replacing the center section. When we put our gauge wheels back on, we're going to just pay close attention as we put this on that gauge wheel is lightly contacting the seed blade in the planting position. We want to make sure we have contact between the gauge wheel and the seed blade to prevent loose, dry dirt from falling in between and getting in the seed trench. That can help us with, or hinder us with dry dirt in the seed trench and also maybe some planting depth. As we move back the row unit here real fast, I want to make one note about these bolts. These are loose here, as you can see. They are supposed to be loose. If you tighten those, we'll end up breaking our top panel here, and that'll end up in replacement. As we move back the row unit, I just want to touch base really fast on our tailstock here. These cams are adjustable. It's very important that this be centered in the row unit, or centered in the seed trench, and that we can break up our sidewall compaction as we go. We got our depth stop here. We're going to go into a little bit more of checking this here in a minute, but it's critical that we check these and make sure that we've got no wear, no broken components in here in any of our linkage. One final thing on the row unit here that we run into a lot that can cause a big problem is these no-till coulters. We see these on almost every planter that we put out. The critical thing on these isn't necessarily bearing health or blade diameter, but setting. This must never be below the seed blades. In fact, it should be 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch above the seed blade. We want this to do, the opening, to take some stress off the seed blades, but we want the seed blades to do the final prep of the true V.